Hello, smashing. No, no, no. You are better than that. Hello, smashing. Hello. Excellent. The prologue to do the next right thing. So a little bit that I have written in the last 24, 36 hours. The first right thing, never mind do the next right thing, the first right thing I did was come to Freiburg. I've never been to a smashing conference. This is my first time. What a wonderful thing. On the way here, in the airport, there was books about the futures with Fox animations and graphics, and that was a sign. That was something like, oh, this is the thing that I'm going to talk about in the place that I'm going to, and so on. And then I brought a book on the flight, so I didn't buy that book, because I brought another book by a German author. I didn't think it was going to be relevant, and in the first 3 minutes of the flight, I was like, oh, I can include that thing as well. And then I landed, and all the flights were on time, and then I met all these amazing people, and had so many different conversations on the first night, and then in all the talks yesterday, that I started rewriting the talk. At the same time, going around Freiburg and looking at all the wonderful cathedrals and stuff with the stained glass, and inside the stained glass, of course, there's stained glass things made by blacksmiths and smitheries about blacksmithing as well, so that's really exciting. And then we've got whatever the hell these are. But it's also brilliant because there's parts of the talk that's about water, and it's going to be a wonderful... I've never been to smashing before. I was going, oh, well, we'll kind of write the talk when I get there and I understand what the vibe is. And I'll introduce myself properly and say, hello, my name's John, I run Smithery, and Smithery is a strategic design practice. So strategic design bridges disciplines and departments, roles and responsibilities. It's concerned with all the factors around the thing and not just the thing itself. I use the word thing quite a lot for reasons that I might or might not get onto. We do this for lots and lots of different clients all across the world. We're based in the UK. I am Scottish, but I have been down south for long enough to speak slowly at international conferences. He hopes. Today's talk is about do the next right thing. Okay, so I'm going to show you this model. This is the abstract version of it. It's called Zenko Mapping. And you can apply it to lots and lots of different things, research, design, development, non-UX or development projects as well. It's really flexible, and I hope you will get enough from this talk that you can go, that was worth hearing from someone who's never been to a smashing before. Okay, yes, good. Thanks, there he's there. Excellent. So, at the heart of the smithery practice, we help companies, people see the world differently. I hope no one gets seasick. For decades, we've been told to be afraid of drowning in data. Okay? There is a tsunami of data that is crashing onto the beaches of the civilized world from 1996 at the Information Architects Conference. And we think, oh yeah, this is how we've always talked about digital information. But it's not even a new metaphor. Being in Germany, of course, is a great time to talk about printing. The book flood was a thing. With the invention and spread of printing and movable type, the mass of books is often cast in a nautical metaphor in all the research that's happening at the time. It's like a sea of scholarship and a flood of books, all caused by those new technologists and their fancy ways of doing things. No, not that one, the other one. But it's interesting, we've lived in this metaphor for a long time. But what does information as liquid imply in all the language and all the terms that we use when describing it? I think it says two things. It assumes that all information is the same, because all molecules of water are the same, or all molecules of oil are the same. It's like all this stuff is the same. We step back, we can just treat it all similarly. Which then makes us primarily concerned with the storage of it, and the channeling of it, and how it flows, and where we push it, and so on. But we don't think about what it actually is when we use those metaphors. Metaphors are really interesting. So there was work done by Lakoff and all in the 70s, 80s, making the point that sort of like, the more we speak about something as if it is something, and we use a metaphor, we act like it is that thing. We know it's not. If you ask us, we know it's not. But we act as if it is. Subconsciously, our behaviors start treating it in that way. But information is not all the same. That is the very point of it. It is a difference that makes a difference. All of these individual things, particles, pixels, they're all different. It's less important where the information is, and it's more important to think about what it's doing and what it does. It creates light bulb moments. It prompts flashes of inspiration. It makes us long for new perspectives. It helps us see the big picture. And even just now thinking about those metaphors and all of the others like them, including the one that Vitaly used 6 minutes ago on stage, does the future look bright? We use information as light, not liquid, all the time metaphorically. But when it's at its most useful, when we're actually helping people see, we are such a visual species. It's really interesting being next to the cathedral and going in and understanding that when the stained glass in these buildings is made, it is there to convey information, to tell stories to people who can't read, to talk about power, to talk about things to worship and so on, etc. It's communicating things other than just in minute detail. And this whole conference so far has been nothing if not show and tell. Every time somebody's going, well, we could look at this, but actually if you can shift this perspective away and into the visual metaphors to help people see, this will aid what we're trying to do. So, metaphorically, at the heart of the practice, this idea, information is 1 million pixels on a screen, not 1 million drops in a barrel. So, what do you do with a metaphor like that? So how do you take that and go, okay, that's very nice and it makes the good first 7 minutes of a talk fly by, but what do you do with it then? So I've been thinking for the last 4 or 5 years whilst working on this metaphor, going, okay, how do you make tools for this? Because as Dan Dennett points out, the blacksmith makes his own tools. Blacksmiths are really interesting because they make the tools from the barber and the butcher and the tailor and so on, but they have to make the tools themselves in order to do something. And every time you go to a cathedral or any city or town and so on, you find the blacksmith at the center of stories and work and artisanship and craft and so on. So we make tools. We've got some on the table after, like physical tools, things that you can actually work with. But a lot more of our stuff is about frameworks and tools for thinking with and be able to turn the new things into different ways of working with the web, outside the web. Everything nowadays is underpinned by digital anyway. And we've tested them out for 10 years. I've been teaching this Innovation in Future Thinking summer course in Barcelona. So this becomes a nice way to be able to test some of these tools and experiment and so on. So for instance, thinking about light and how you help people see, one of the tools we have is called the obliquoscope, which helps you not look at what you're looking at. What do I mean by that? So if you think about Buchanan's 4 orders of design, you have the appearance of things. You hold this little frame with questions up and go, what's on the surface of this? But then you also think about the materials that things consist of. Then you also think about the interactions that they create, the ones that you can see at that moment or the ones that you can imply. And beyond that, the systems that support them. So we've got some little ones outside on the table afterwards. We'll look at that. But then into kind of like the more conceptual realms, we have things like this, moments of enlightenment. If you think about all the information that is out there, you can't possibly capture all of that and bring it inside your organization. Or if you're even just thinking as an individual, bring it all inside your head. So you have sensing filters to bring all that stuff into sort of like going, okay, this is the stuff that I think is important or we think is important, this is what we need here. But it's not a static thing. You take that information and say, okay, what are our options? What could we do with that next? And you have a set of conceptual filters. And then finally, you want to do something. You want to take action. So you have decision filters that say, right, of all the options we have in front of us, we need to be able to sort of choose the one that we should do. And then, of course, that goes back into the real world and the whole process starts again. So some of our work is literally about working with people to stretch their sensing, conceptual, or decision filters to think about how they or the organization can see the world differently. But the tool that Fitterly and Co. asked me to talk about specifically today was Zenko Mapping. Zenko's a strange word. It's basically from this. It's from, does anybody know anything about Japanese yokai? Oh, there's some nodding. Oh, okay, interesting. So this is a good site for it. I've specifically linked to the Zenko one. But folklore is really interesting. It's how people tell the stories to each other about their entire culture, about how they live, about sort of like what their collective theory of mind is. Zenko is essentially the good fox in Japanese yokai culture. So you have the typical folklore, bad foxes who are mischievous and cause humans trouble. But good foxes are messengers from the goddess Inari. They're helping humans at every point of their journey to do the right thing. I'll talk more about Zenko in a bit. Zenko Mapping as a tool comes from these two books. Has anybody read How Buildings Learn or Clock of the Long Now? Show of hands? No. Reading list time. Two friends recommended me these two books. Not when the books were published, but in the same week. And the friends didn't know each other. So that was interesting. I thought, okay, so I'm going to read both of these books at the same time and see what happens. I found out that Stuart Brand, the author of both of them, basically just used the same model, right? Which is good author practice, I think. It's like, I wonder if I can take the thing that I've used before and just put it in something else and nobody will notice. How Buildings Learn is about sort of like, so the building is static. The structure changes very slowly, but the skin changes more quickly than that. The services change more quickly than that, all the way down to stuff, which changes really quite quickly. I've got friends who say it didn't do anything for architecture, that book, but there was a lot of web development got inspired by this idea of the paste layers. But then in his other book, The Clock of the Long Now, he shifts the thing to talking about people. And he says, so culture is the work of all people. It's a very long and slow process to change culture. Governance is quicker. The infrastructure that government presides is quicker than that. All the way up to fashion, which is very fast and frothy and bubbly. Having read both at the same time, I was thinking, maybe these things go together. Maybe they are linked to the material and the social dimensions. So I spent far too long in Keynote trying to illustrate it. But it's turned out to be worthwhile in it. So if you imagine the fast to slow layers of culture interleaved with the fast to slow layers of materiality. Because I did economics and econometrics at uni, I'm sort of broken. Because I see things like this and go, oh, hello, that's a matrix, that's a model, I could use that. You can take the metaphor and go, okay, I need something that's boxy and specific and I can turn it into a thing. So I started thinking about this as the gearbox, the connection between the material and the social. Then started drawing axes, because that's what economists do. But from the social construction, from fast to slow, and the material construction, from fast to slow. By social construction, you might think of a conversation between colleagues is very fast. If you're two people in a 1,000-strong organization have one conversation about a thing, it doesn't go anywhere, but suddenly you try and build it into the team, see if it works across the company, and then you're going to I wonder if this all translates to users. This work becomes slower, longer, takes time. And then the material construction angle is all the way from a click on a web page. So just one action in one moment of time and all of the mechanics that go behind that, all the way up to the stuff that Sandy was talking about, all the impact you have materially on the world with this site that provides that one click. So you have these two axes now. Material is about objects, environment, systems, the material world. Social is about conversations, behaviors, interactions. You can take two extreme philosophical angles on it. One is about the world shapes us. So everything we do is because of the material world around us. And one of us, we shape the world. Everything we decide then shapes the material world and so on. I am not an extremist of either. I just like the interaction between the two. I like the way that sort of sometimes the world shapes us and sometimes we shape the world. Everything is context dependent. The most useful way I found of using Zenko mapping is basically to split it into 9 boxes and just say, okay, so the material angle is sketch. That's the first thing you do. Once you've got a sketch, you go, okay, so what's the scaffolding around that? If we think this idea is good, what does it demand? What does it require? What tooling do we want to put around it? What costs? What resources? And then finally you go, right, we now have everything in place and we can build the thing. This is a typical design process. No, nothing different there. But then on the social construction you go, so there's the team or an individual. You go, someone who knows, or a group of people who know everything about a project. All the information comes to them. They speak to people. We get qualitative information from users, from colleagues, from journalists, from academics. Anyone on the outside of that team, you're going, we get qualitative information. If you could, you would speak to everyone. You would sit down and speak to everyone, but time and resources never allows that. That's why we use quant. We go, all quantitative behavior is human behavior at scale. It gets thinner, we know less about it, but suddenly we can put the two together and we know the what from the quant and the why from the qual. So we float that along the bottom axis. So sketch, scaffold, structure, team, qual, quant. Being schooled in market research, which was my first graduate job, it was like being a Karate Kid. It was like wax on, wax off for all quant and qual. When I talk about making things people want rather than making people want things, which is kind of the studio tagline, it's not, crucially, making things that people ask for. It's about thinking about 3 different types of wants from Doyle's value-based marketing. So existing wants sit on the surface. That's just like foraging. You're going, this stuff is just lying around, you can just pick it up. Latent wants are farming. So they're just, you have to distill the surface, you have to disturb the surface a little more, plant something, get some yield, so it's a bit harder. And then down at the bottom, you've got incipient wants, like mining. You have to know exactly where to dig. You can't be sure. It's going to be really hard work, but that's where the gold lies. So this is a kind of a little research and project framework. Invites you, if you're starting on a project anew, to go, okay, I'm going to start here. I'm going to sit in our team and have a sketch. Go, yes, okay, we could do this. What do we do now? 2 things. 1, improve. Can our team take the thing that we've just done and go, yeah, that's right, we could make a better version of that? Or do we share? Do we take the sketch at that point and go, we could take this out to other people and go, what do you think? What do you know? You take it to other people in the organization and say, might this work? You take it to users and just put in the sketch in front of them and go, well, what sort of role would this play in your life? Assume you go that way, and then you go, okay, we could go and look for data to back this up, given what we know in the qual. Or we could take what we've learned in the qual and refine a sketch at that level. Every time it's just improve or share. It's really simple. You just go back and forward, back and forward, back and forward, all the way up to, hey, project's out the door. Except the next time you do it, it might be really, really different. And then the next time you do it after that, it might be different again. And the next time you do it after that, might be different again. You could have 2 teams who approach things really differently. It makes you think about, who's in my team? What sort of qual? Where are we getting the quant? What do we mean by sketching? What tooling do we do? What's the way that we decide when to move across a border from one box to the other? So the kind of the initial easiness of the model invites lots of thought-provoking questions between team members about, what are we going to do next? Where are we going to go? Why don't we go back? Going back's great. Going back's my favorite time, because it's not the sort of, it's like snakes and ladders. It's just up and down, back and forth, very light. There's no kind of like great shakes. If you say, we're going back to sketch, fine. Do the next right thing. Do the next right thing, which I know sounds like a quote from Frozen, but it's not. It's from Frozen 2.
Do the next right.
Anyway. And just sitting watching all the talks yesterday and this morning, there are lots of different ways of building for the web, says Phil. Yes, there are. This is just a way of modeling lots of those different ways rather than picking just one. Show, don't tell, and quickly iterate, says Chris. Yep, that's it. Just like bouncing back and forth between that line as often as you like, rather than going all the way up to structure before you talk to anyone at all and then shipping it and going, well, why didn't that work? Asking questions at the right time after all that work. Then Emily's talk yesterday, talking about investing heavily in this discovery stage, going, maybe we should be down at the sketch level for longer. Maybe we shouldn't rush this. Maybe we shouldn't be floating above that line too quickly. But then the flip of that is going, okay, we now have too much data. How do we get away from that and back to the peoples in the story? Just articulate what it is we're trying to do. Then this morning, research can eliminate gaps, build up empathy, and increase the project's sustainability. What's it like to bring different people from the organization in at those different points earlier than they might have, or later than they would ever have, in order to increase that empathy around a sustainability project? Mapping individual projects like this becomes fun. The real fun begins when you start mapping multiple things. So you go, the instances, this is how things work round here. You then go, okay, so once I start building up enough learning about all of these different things, that becomes the issues. And once I've got the issues, I can start thinking about the interventions. I can start thinking about, okay, so what's going to happen next? And this becomes easy to turn into a project plan. You go, okay, so what we're looking for is collect the instances, then review the issues, and then design interventions to change the way we work to help us do the next right thing more often. Some examples. So we did a project with BBC in 2017, maybe, who were basically just looking to create a shared understanding in a very diverse organization, where a web project could be redesign the Crime Watch webpage all the way up to rebuild iPlayer. Okay, so these are very different projects, but they were like, well, there must be similar lessons we can learn in the organization to help that change. Essentially going, how do we map this into some sort of heat map? The way we went about it, and it's like, what's interesting about this is like, whenever you do a project with a company, it's like you do it in a context-specific way. You can't say, oh, this is always going to, you must always do Zenko mapping in this way for this company. You go, no, do it in the way that suits you. So we did some early stage work with them going, what do we mean by social construction within the BBC's UX and D team? And what do we mean by material construction? Context-specific ways of thinking about those boxes. Then picking example projects and mapping 5 key stages of them. You go, pick a project as a retrospective and go, what are the 5 key moments that we realized that we'd maybe taken a misstep and we should have done something else? You turn that into a show and tell session, and then you start capturing those individual things, but because you've also got the context of other people's conversations around them, you can then build what else might have been going on at the same time. And then, just because I'm very material as a person, as a designer, so I like kind of like making people make things out of things to show me rather than just doing it digitally. So we did lots of world-building models and metaphors with Lego personas and various different things in order to really push into some of the insights we were generating. So some of the things that came out. Understanding barriers to progress. So the organization stepping back and looking at lots of projects as a whole. We started thinking of these 2 things as walls. This wall was super easy to get over. All right? So you could run around and do sketches, and the barriers to getting into that structure thing was very little. So every project that you started as a sketch could get over. That wall was really hard. Suddenly, they had all these projects knocking on the door of basically engineering time. They're going, can we build this now? Can we do this now? And so on. But going, no, we've let too much into that middle layer. So it's all floating around there and not going anywhere. So how do we choose to let things not always progress to the same place? We also discovered that sort of like you can use this backwards as a model. If somebody gives you a thing that's out there and says, this is finished and it's broken, why? You can use it to sort of like to step back through the decisions that have been made and to think about, okay, so what would we do to make not just this project better, but also think about how we stop more things like this happening in the future. You can also reveal motivations. So essentially, and we've heard talk of this yesterday as well, people who just want a thing done, or people who've got evidence for it. So the difference between data-driven, it's like, look, this is clearly broken because of this thing is happening. Some sort of partner opinion or user opinion and so on. So they had funny language because it's the BBC, like partner became this replacement for qual. Or just people who get a personal motive. I want this taken down. Why? Because I don't like it. I don't want it. Or I want this thing. But it allowed you to think about where the motivation was coming from and how you might take people through those three different columns as it went. And then maybe my favorite bit was we started to identify key areas of activity. So you start seeing that all of the BBC's projects would go through this structural phase which felt too structural. It felt sort of like, why are you sort of like having to bring all these people together to make these decisions about something that smaller or different companies would just get on and do? And it's because of the politics. So we shifted it into the metaphorical space and started describing it as the souk. So the souk is basically inspired by the Moroccan marketplace. And it's really interesting because it's both good and bad. If you know what you want in a souk, it's a brilliant place to go. Because you've probably got existing relationships, you know what things are worth, you know how much time and resource you've got, you know what sort of thing you're going to get. It's great. It's the kind of like negotiation space. If you wander into the souk not knowing what it is or who you should speak to and so on, it is a terrible place. Because you could be wandering there for hours and never make any progress. So we actually built all of these metaphorical areas for each of these places and talked about the difference between going from the sandpit into the Guildhall or the cantina is like basically you go, never go straight from the sandpit to the souk. Right, that's just asking for trouble. So either go to the guild house and get someone to build you something to take into the souk. Show the thing. Show the thing. Just walk in with a prototype and go, we think we're interested in this. Or find allies in the cantina first, have low-level conversations and then go up there. And then we built kind of like maps and worksheets and whatever else and so on. And I'll talk about sort of like one of the failings in it in a minute. But the second project I want to talk about is RHP, who are, it's a very different project. They're basically a housing provider. So they do social housing in London. And they wanted some help because they were reorientating their customer service team. And this is just in the kind of like the second year of the pandemic, so everything is online. So suddenly you don't have as many of those rich people-to-people interactions as one, so you have to go about the kind of like Zenko mapping differently. The initial sort of like sketching of hypothesis just on Miro boards, just to go, okay, we think we should speak to these people because this feels like the right sort of domain for them. They'll have knowledge we don't. How do we get that and how do we collect that? We then had this collective board for sequential stakeholder interviews. So rather than doing them all individually, it almost becomes like storytelling. So you make the first map with some people and you take it to different teams. So this is what we've heard from this team. How does your work fit in this or disagree, whatever else? We then started reviewing this collective emergent map together to start naming the sum of interactions. And then my favorite bit is we started testing it with examples. Like once we had a theory of how the organization supplied customer service, what became apparent is that kind of like the axes don't work. We've got 3 boxes on each, etc. But what's really interesting is down here, what we thought was just our direct customer relationship is actually 2 things. So a contract with a householder is not a contract about a flat with a tenant, with their whole household, because other people live in that house, and the contract does not reflect the material reality of a flat or a house and so on. So we stretched the model out for them, just to say, well, actually, think about the tenant and the household and the resident and the neighbor, and think about the tenancy as a material artifact, the house, the property, and the neighborhood. So suddenly it gave them a way of situating their customer service reorganization into thinking not about it like being a financial service as a one-to-one direct relationship, but everything becomes context dependent. If you call up with a problem in your flat, in a block of flats all run by RHP, you go, okay, you've got this problem. Does it also mean that other people have this problem near you? Are other people causing this problem near you? Is it something that we can intervene in various different places? So you backtrack from that first customer contract. But then also you can build in programming to the customer service plan to go, okay, so what are the first 3 or 4 suggestive steps we should make to make sure that our customer service operators are not just dealing with one customer, but the problem as a whole. With both of these problems organizationally for BBC and RHP, one thing, and I liked yesterday's invitation to talk about struggles, creating critical culture mass is hard and momentum and getting everyone to know the model. It's really easy for a couple of people or a small team. But what we found is sort of like it stuck for a bit and then people left. So we can sort of, it's almost like you can teach people and teams and enough sort of like you can get, it works at that level, but it requires a different kind of like material implementation to work at kind of like a consistent, ongoing organizational level so that it sticks when the people that you've taught it have gone. So, what makes Zenko different from other design models? What makes all these the same? Nothing, John. That's not the right answer. Linear. Time. Everything is about time. Everything is about the promise of, oh yes, we will do all this, and then it will all be fine. A trap. It's a trap. It is a trap. It's really interesting on the 20th anniversary of the Double Diamond thing that the Design Council did. Tim Bound from IDEO goes, I don't think of it as a method. I think of it as a heuristic. At best, it's a rule of thumb. But it has invited the McKinsey-fication of design. Fuck this shit. We know this is true. You can go, yeah, sure, we can promise the client that, and we can't really sketch it out, and what we can see from here is this. But this at least allows you to acknowledge that duration is an output and not an input. Just doing the next right thing at every given stage is really important. Continuous contextual decision making. Shut up. And it's something that sort of like, it's easy. It's easy to draw. It's easy to talk to people about. I keep the ones that I've drawn that somebody else hasn't taken. So I've got a big pile of them at home. I taught my son when he was 7 to use it. That's his diagram of what you would do to build a building. We talked about it at the speakers' dinner. But this is the key point of models like this, Dave Snowden's point. If you can't draw in the back of a table napkin, it has no utility. If you can't just sit there and draw it on a card, what's the point? So it's a model for you, your next project, your team, your business. Unleash the balloons. A future note. There's another thing called Zenko systems I'll talk to you about one day, which is how do you take that and then load it into kind of like my friend Dan's strategic design map, where you say, okay, this could be a system of objects and places and services and systems of systems, which speaks to Bruno Latour's thing of it's a complex assembly of contradictory issues. But it all gets a bit Inception at that point. Sorry, I have a Tom Hardy problem. Every time I mention the word Inception, he just... We'll do it next time, okay? Zenko mapping, the last thing, Zenko. it's a cultural thing. Essentially, I was really interested, sort of like, oh, that's interesting that Japan's got so much cultural folk stories about foxes, because we have them in Britain. I'm sure they have them in France, and they have them in Russia, and they have them in America and Canada and so on. And that's because the fox can live anywhere, okay? It has no kind of, like, it will either make itself a burrow or live in a bin or an old car or whatever else. It'll eat anything. They did a survey in Georgia that found that the typical fox would eat 27 different varieties of food from different places. And it will live in any size group. The reason everyone has fox folklore is because foxes are everywhere, because they are very, very, very adaptable. Zenko mapping is here to make you very, very, very adaptable to live in any one of these spaces. So, do the next right thing. Say hello on LinkedIn. Come to the fireplace. Done.
Thank you so much, John.
Oh.
Let me just jump in here. It's fascinating. That's very, very exciting. So I think in many ways, again, when we're thinking about what we're doing, I think most of the time, we kind of get into this almost trap of, well, let's just design a flow. Let's just think about what it's going to be looking at scale. It seems like we always try to see this big picture instead of taking very small but very right steps, right? I think that many organizations are maybe kind of almost stuck in there. Some things that came up in here were kind of related to that. Sasha is wondering, how would an unplanned and in the end hurtful intervention from C-level, like we need this new thing now fast, AI.
Yep. AI is harmful.
Yeah, but I mean, how would it look in the Zenko mapping? And how is your experience with the acceptance of this realization when shown to C-level?
So that's interesting. So if you think back to the BBC one with the 3 columns, and just going, okay, so is this personally driven by an agenda? Is this driven by conversations that are being had with other people, or is this being driven by data? Finding a way to express that to C-level and say, okay, so here are 3 buckets. How much of this is personal belief? How much of this is conversations? And can you tell us more about the conversation? Because you are now that qualitative researcher. Or can you show us the data that tells us this as well? Because this will be super helpful in our design process. Oh.
Something's happening.
Yeah.
Here. You don't see it yet. Don't worry. You just don't see it yet.
So that idea of being able to just sort of invite them in, invite anyone in your organization in as a co-conspirator. You go, we want to get to the bottom of this in the best way for the organization. So what information are we working with? If you also think back to that moments of enlightenment diagram, it's like all the stuff that's out there. What are our sensing filters, conceptual filters, decision-making filters that we are currently operating with, and how do we stretch them or compress them to find the right information to use as a design material?
So I think we have something here which I'm not aware of.
Oh, do you not know about this?
No.
But you know everything.
No.
Oh.
So I think that you're probably going to show something.
Yeah, so we've got...
Me.
It's not up yet.
Here with you.
Yeah?
Okay.
So we can sketch things out.
Sure.
If we want to, if there are any of the questions.
I think we want to.
Yeah?
Just it would be nice to see it's kind of coming together, sure.